Hello, everyone. I'm Jean-Claude at Beyond Mystic, and welcome to today's very special War Correspondent Report. Temporal markers and inflection points are the topics for today. And with me, of course, is Mr. Tom Luongo. You can find him at tomluongo.me, and there you can subscribe to his Gold, Goats, and Guns mailing list before you go. And of course, you can find him very prolific here on Twitter as well at Tom Luongo. Tom, welcome to the Beyond Mystic audience. How are you today, sir?
I'm good. Thank you for the invite, Jean-Claude. Good to meet you.
I'm excited to have you on. Tom, we're simulcasting here now on YouTube and on Rumble. We're going to spend a few minutes here on YouTube with the audience and on our best behavior for a few minutes, and then we'll move over the conversation here to our Rumble feed where we can welcome right now. There's about 1,200 people now in the live chat. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us here today on this live interactive show on Rumble. I'll try to bring your comments up as we go, perhaps some questions later on in the show. But first, I'd like to lay down some track here with our brand new guest on the Beyond Mystic channel. Tom, before we start, we typically ask the same question to all of our new guests. How did the universe conspire to have you doing the work that you're doing today? Share with the audience members here your trajectory in life to how you got to this, being this crazy conspiracy theorist who appears to be right most of the time. Tom.
The best way to describe it is necessity. How about I was 42 years old and unemployed as a BS in chemistry with way too much experience and not enough education. So without an MBA, without a master's or even a PhD, I was pretty much overqualified for everything that I was qualified for. And so nobody wanted to hire me. So it just came down to, I always wanted to be a writer of some form or another. Dude, unemployment is a great motivator, and today it would be Fiverr, but back then it used to be Elance. That's where I started, just putting myself out there to try and make some money. And it started that way. I fell in with a guy with a young broker from Canada, that of Vietnamese extraction. He's out in Vietnam. We fell in together. I wound up ghostwriting his book. I wrote under his name for, God knows, about a year and a half or so. We, tried to build a business, and then eventually I got picked up by Newsmax, and I started writing Gold Stock Advisor for Newsmax. Within about 6 months, we rebranded that into a different newsletter that was more commodity focused and more to hit my voice. And then I did the gig with Newsmax until 2017, when change in leadership over there brought a different direction. I got summarily, I got let go.
Yeah.
And had to go independent. So we launched Gold, Goats, and Guns that summer. And, by the end of that was in April of 2017. And by September, we started the newsletter, and that was that. And we're kind of here where we are today.
I see that you have a very wide focus here, doing geopolitical and finance here on the website, guys. Again, tomluongo.me. Tom, let me ask you here. You started in chemistry. It seems you were very much into academia, what people would call normie land. And at some point here, you made the jump here, perhaps a little bit more woo-woo. Of course, you're into technical analysis, but you're also into the woo. I'm going to bring up one of the interviews you brought up with Crypto Rich last week for the audience members here to follow up on that. But what was the transition? What was the trigger for you in your awakening up process here?
I lost a small fortune for a guy who didn't have any money in the Y2K NASDAQ bust. And then I slowly but surely tried to figure out why that was. And well, that was my introduction to Austrian economics. And one day I came home with my wife. I said, honey, I know what our problem is. She's like, what? I'm like, we're libertarians. And she's like, what do you mean? And then I gave her the world's smallest political quiz, and she's like, yeah, you're right. We're libertarians. Now everything makes sense. Now all of this angst and anxiety about the way anger about how the world works started to make some sense to us. And then I just fell down that rabbit hole and just kept going farther and farther down that route. And, by 2003, I was out here in the Florida summer, building my own house on a big old 14-acre farmstead that we bought, and had a kid. And by 2008, I had pulled all my money out of the financial markets, and I was a complete gold bug. And then it just kind of went down that road. And then once I started working for Newsmax, the interesting thing about this is that once I started working for Newsmax, and things weren't really working very well. And the whole kind of standard Peter Schiff level of understanding of monetary policy wasn't working. markets were just not responding the way I thought they would. And even though I understood that QE was deflationary, it's like all this stuff. And even though I absorbed a lot of the lessons well, I hadn't quite learned how to put all of that in the context of a global market. And it was the shift from being, just focusing on how quote unquote screwed the Americans were, the US was, and broadening that argument into a global perspective. And then that's when I became fascinated with geopolitics and all the rest of it. And, it really was, I'll be honest with you, the catalyst for me was the buildup into Obama's failed attempt to invade Syria. And it was when the British Parliament told David Cameron, no, we're not going to support Obama going to Syria, invading Syria. When that happened, which was the first time a Tory government Tory Parliament had gone against its government in 100 years. And I just sat, my wife was reading the drugs report, and she's, was like, oh, by the way, this just happened. I'm like, what? Say that again. And she went, I'm like, oh. And at that point, I think it was really, everything changed for me at that moment. And then I started paying attention to that very carefully. And then I started watching Putin like a hawk. And I started watching the development of things in Syria and how that moved into Ukraine and how that worked with Ukraine and everything. And it's just slowly but surely, it was just, this one of these hard fought, long, roads to somewhat understanding how the way I think the world works. And, it's a rabbit hole that you're constantly going down, but as long as you remain open to new information, while not getting too crazy, eventually you come to something close to the truth. And then you go from there.
Okay. You just mentioned this awakening process and realizing that you had to look at the global picture of the global market to try to better understand it. In my view, it's kind of like watching the Big Short, the movie. At first, like, of course, everything's going to crash, but then it doesn't. And then it does, but the bonds or the products are not reflecting the market as the banks are trying to offload their positions, et cetera, et cetera. We're seeing that now. We're in that same position again now, but maybe on a bigger scale. And I want to add to that a little bit of woo for our audience members is that when we look at the global picture now, we also have to add in the possibility that we don't live in an enclosed system, that perhaps there are resources on this planet that are moving also off planet, which also would add to how difficult it is to really understand the situation we find ourselves in. Okay, so guys, if you want to join with us now, if you go to beyondmystic.net/war, at the top of the page there's the great silver bar giveaway. Of course, we're giving away a 1 kilo silver Valcambi bar. This is offered by Miles Franklin Precious Metals Investment. The draw is going to be on July 9th and no purchase necessary. So if you follow down at the bottom of the page there, we have the topics for today's show, including the reference link here to this episode that I want to decode a little bit further here with Tom. This was on Crypto Rich. You can find that here. The link is in the description box below as well. Tom, let's start there. In that particular interview, I guess one of the pivotal points or the inflection point you talked about here was Yellen's visit to Beijing. Now, of course, there wasn't a lot of fanfare on this. We do have a couple of news reports on it. There's 3 takeaways here from the New York Times, which you can, print out, roll up, and put in your wastebasket. Let's get into what perhaps really happened in China, and let's look at all of these subsequent events that have happened since then. So if you want to take a first 5 minutes here to paint that picture again on our best behavior here. Once we do that, we'll move over to the Rumble conversation here with the rest of the audience. So Tom, first picture here, what happened a couple of weeks ago and what seems to be some of the consequences of that particular visit, Tom?
Well, the thing about Yellen's trip to Beijing, it didn't even register in my mind when it happened. I was like, not paying very much attention to it until I saw a tweet from a guy who said, oh, by the way, Yellen lands in China and the dollar starts to drop like a rock. And I'm like, and then and it wasn't like, that was about Thursday. So that was after the NATO summit in Vilnius was done. That was after Yellen had come home. That was after the massive move in the sovereign bond markets all across the United States. So this was on Thursday. This is a week ago. We're doing this on Thursday, the 20th. This was literally a week ago, right? And I'm doing a podcast for my Newsmax subscribers for the newsletter I write for them. And I'm sitting there floundering around for 30 minutes going, I'm really confused. It feels like a buy all the things day. Gold is up, oil is up, stocks are up, bonds are up, everything, everyone's buying everything. What's going on? None of that makes any sense. It wasn't, you know, I'm not a big, at this point, I'm not a big risk on, risk off duality kind of guy. You know, when I watch the markets every day, I have a sniff for, I have a good spidey sense, I think, for what's happening. And that just felt weird. Right? What happened from Monday of that week all the way in through Thursday. And so I finally saw that little, and then everything just kind of collapsed. And I went, oh, we didn't declare World War III at Vilnius. Huh. We didn't. So what's going on here? And now we back up a little bit. Now we think.
Well, just hold on there for a second, Tom. Let me just bring this up. This was a Zero Hedge article. Xi telling the Chinese military here to deepen war combat planning and intention. This was on July 9th. So we went to, hey, we seem to be driving towards World War III, to then Zelensky.
So maybe we're not, right?
At the NATO conference here. Let's get into that.
Yeah, well, remember that Yellen didn't meet with Xi. The only person to meet with Xi from the United States in the last couple of months is Kissinger, and that just happened this morning. And here he is, 100 years old, having to do foreign policy because the Biden administration is incapable of doing diplomacy. As a matter of fact, they're involved in anti-diplomacy. So now, from my mind, and this was my initial read a week ago, I said, well, let's connect some dots. Janet Yellen's got a problem. She blackmailed the entire world with this, oh my God, the U.S. is going to default if we don't raise the debt ceiling nonsense that went on for, what, 6-7 months from the day the Republicans secured the majority in the House. She was screaming that we were going to, you know, they were going to drain the Treasury General account. By the way, she was doing it on purpose. And then, because she doesn't work for the United States, she works for, in my mind, what I call Davos. Now, so she's fomenting a crisis that all the markets are having to price in for months on end. He drains the Treasury's general account. Powell keeps raising interest rates and keeps doing QT in the background, sucking liquidity out of the overseas markets and out of the credit markets here in the United States. Once the debt ceiling is done, she's staring at having to raise $1 trillion in the bond markets to refill the TGA in order to pay the government's bills come this fall. Okay. Everybody knows this. So where is she going to do that? Now, 90% of financial analysts, and I even brought this up to Daniel DiMartino Booth when I had her on my podcast. I said, the demand has to come from overseas. And she said, no, it's not going to happen. Not in this market, not on the verge of this kind of recession, yada, yada. I said, well, yeah, but there's still a tremendous amount of dollar demand out there to service debts and everything else, especially at these higher interest rates. Moreover, I've just seen this too many times, Danielle, watching global markets. Every time the U.S. yield curve goes up about a quarter point too far, all the central banks come flooding in and they rebuy. If they've been selling, they start rebuying in order to reload for the next time they have to defend their currencies,
right?
Against the dollar bull wave. And so I thought that was going to be at least significant, and never thinking that what was happening in the bond market could have easily been somebody pressuring bond yields higher by selling treasuries into Yellen's needing to issue a wall of treasuries, a literal waterfall of treasuries. So what happens, right? At the same time, you've got the vandals in the United States government, the Victoria Nulands, the Jake Sullivans, along with the British and the Poles and the Lithuanians, are all screaming for more war, more Ukraine into NATO, more this, more that. We have to fight Russia to the last Ukrainian, Pole, and I don't know, everybody else on the planet. We have to do this.
And cluster bombs are okay now, by the way. So
and cluster bombs are okay, and all of this stuff. So think of it this way.
Yeah.
If you're the Chinese and you don't want to go to war with the United States, do you dump some treasuries into the market? Do you push the 10-year yield up against, knowing full well that Christine Lagarde at the ECB is also doing yield curve control?
Yeah.
I can't show the charts here, but I published an article on the blog, the last public blog post, not podcast, but blog post on tomluongo.me. You'll see me. I put it out, 4 charts in the middle of this thing. Here's a red line, 2.5 years on the 2.5% on the German 10-year, 3% on the Dutch 10-year, 4.25% on the Italian 10-year, blah, 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 blah. And the United States 10-year was just about to break out to the upside. was just about to break above 4.1%. And if it goes, they all go. Lagarde
Right.
will not be able to keep those caps in place. So what happens? To my mind, you send Yellen over to China and say, and beg Xi to buy some treasuries. Simple. I need you to buy treasuries because you're the only one who can buy treasuries and not move the market. Or you can move the treasury market, but you won't move your own currency. If Lagarde buys a whole bunch of treasuries, the euro will strengthen too far. The pound will strengthen too far. They all strengthened. Like the euro went from $1.09 to $1.12. The British pound went from 128 to 131. All this stuff happened. The yen strengthened down to, I think, a low of like 129 or some insane thing like that. But when you saw all that coordinated with the meeting with Yellen and the one of the members of the finance ministry, you say to yourself, was there a deal? And was that deal, you will put World War III on hold for at least 6 months?
Okay, hold on right there. Hold on right there before we get into too much trouble here on YouTube. Okay, guys, so yes, Yellen goes hand in hand here to Xi, or his officials in this particular case. And what's the incentive for China to say yes or to agree to any of this? Why would they agree? And what could be the deal? This is what we're going to continue discussing here on the Rumble channel. So thank you so much, everyone, here for joining us on the YouTube feed. I'm going to bring the link one more time here in the live chat to the Rumble channel. So there you go there. And in 3, 2, 1, here we're going to drop the